I'm joined today by Hugh Davidson MBE, who's an acclaimed marketeer, having published various books on the subject, including Offensive Marketing. Hugh studied economics and law at Cambridge University, but he didn't stop at a brilliant career in marketing. That was not sufficient. He went on to do extensive work and research in the field of philanthropy, and it is for that reason that we welcome him today. Hugh, you've had a long and very successful career in philanthropy, if you can call it a career, years of experience in the field. And I'm wondering if you could share some of your experience with other would-be philanthropists. And I'm wondering if you could start by telling me a little bit about your story and what led you to become interested in philanthropy.
I'll try to do that. My parents were very keen on philanthropy, and particularly on environmental issues. And my aunt Nessie, who was Manx, was a teaching missionary in Calcutta, and she founded 3 schools, and she knew Mother Teresa. So that was a family background. It all happened really by mistake almost. In the early 70s, I was managing director of the UK side of a global company, and I saw an ad for chief executive of Save the Children. And rather naively, I applied for the job, realizing that the salary was 1/3 of what I was making as managing director of this UK company. Had a word with my wife Sandra, and we had a couple of children, didn't have much capital, but we decided that, we could live on 1/3 of the income. And so I put my application forward, and I didn't even get shortlisted.
Wow.
And they were absolutely right, because I knew a lot about marketing and business, but I knew nothing about international development. And I'd never even visited any of these places. So they were quite right to put me on my place. So after that, I called up the guy who got the job, because in those days at Save the Children in Oxfam, well, Save the Children particularly, they appointed ambassadors and generals. And so I called up Air Marshal Sir John Lapsley to congratulate him. And we had a very nice conversation. He said, "What do you do? What do you do with life?" And I told him, and he said, "You're exactly the kind of person we want. We're very weak on business people." And he put me on one of the committees, the trading committee. I then became chair of the trading committee, and then I was on the executive board and the council and so on. And I spent a lot of time, because I worked in London, and it was quite easy to get to Clapham, where they then were. So I did a lot of work with Save the Children at the with the head office in my spare time, and that was in the 70s. They were not particularly well run. They're much better run now than they were then. Then we moved to Oxford, because I started up, Sandra and I started up from our back bedroom, a marketing strategy company, Oxford Strategic Marketing. And so I was working 60 hours a week, and we got 2 young children, and so I didn't do a lot in the 80s and 90s. I then decided to retire, and I sold my 55% share of Oxford's strategic marketing to the management, and put the money into a charitable trust, plus quite a bit more, because we had some spare money, and that's how we got started.
It's quite a drive that you have in order to improve the lives of those in countries that don't have as much as we are fortunate to have. Was this drive derived entirely from your family background, from your Aunt Nessie, indeed? What was the wind behind your sales?
Very, very difficult to say. I've just sort of been in favour of equality and things like that. and I like to help other people, and I like to be useful. So one of the big things was, what are you going to do? What area are you going to be in? And we were very keen to get involved in women and girls, because there is prejudice against women, and yet certainly in the developing world, women do most of the work. If you have a picture of people in fields and ask school children, you know, here they are, who are they? Are they men or women? They'll say, oh, they're men. No, most of them are women. So, and women and girls, and I was particularly keen on India because my aunt had been there, and there was a great need there, and also they play cricket, which I'm very keen on. Quite a lot of them speak English. So we started off working in Calcutta, which is where my aunt had been actually.
So wind the clock forward from the 70s to date, and you have recently asked a question which I think is one of the most important questions that could possibly be asked in philanthropy, and is one that hasn't really been satisfactorily answered yet. And the question is, why is impact within charitable giving or philanthropy, why doesn't it achieve its maximal potential? And you have asked this question through the means of through the means of a report which was commissioned by H&S Davidson Trust, and which will be available to our viewers on our website. But could you summarize for me what the key findings of that question were? Why does charitable giving and philanthropic giving, why doesn't it achieve that full potential that it could?
Well, it's a complex sector. That's one reason why it's difficult to get impact. Secondly, I think funders have tended to have a colonial approach, where they decide what is good for the people out there, and very often the decision makers at funders in Zurich or New York or London don't spend a lot of time in the field on the front line. And the fact that you're poor and illiterate doesn't mean to say you aren't very smart.
Yes.
You are very, very smart about your own locality, because you know your family's lived there for a long time. You know how to make things happen and get things done. So lack of equal voices is an issue, and the excellent consultant we had was quite candid with us and said that he thought we were a bit colonial, and so as a result of that we've changed our whole approach. So that's one thing. Secondly, it's very siloed by activity area. So you've got people just focused on human rights or poverty reduction or the environment, and it's not joined up at all. And the other thing is that unlike business, which generates its own money, you've got to go out and get the money from other people, and particularly from governments. Knowledge management is very poorly managed. So there's too much competition and not enough cooperation. So there could be a lot more cooperation and sharing information, sharing knowledge.
Yeah, it's a very excellent point that you make, actually. That colonial mentality that we sometimes have of thinking, well, we will make the decisions for you, and you receive the benefit of our monetary funding, wisdom, and knowledge. Whereas in reality, it's about empowerment, isn't it? It's about empowering people.
Absolutely, and the focus for us really is on doubling or trebling women's income and their family income, and also doubling their empowerment. We've got a number of empowerment measures. So we don't go for small targets. We see no point in saying, well, let's improve this by 10% or 15%. We want to double or treble the income, and we've got mechanisms for doing that with Oxfam, for example. And I think also that funders are rather risk averse, and whereas in business you expect quite a lot of failure, you won't find any of the NGOs admitting they ever have a failure.
Yeah.
Everything is wonderful, everything succeeds. Well, actually the level of failure in the international development sector, I think, is much less than in business, because, in fast-moving consumer goods, over 90% of new brands fail, only 10% succeed. Whereas I would think probably a half or two-thirds of international development programs succeed because they're straightforward, they're building new schools or hospitals or whatever. But there needs to be much more of a risk appetite among funders, and they need to give much more space and autonomy to people on the front line, because the people on the front line know best. I mean, I use the phrase, the wisdom of the front line.
Yes, and I guess as well, more precise mechanisms for measuring that success or that failure, and for learning from that success or from that failure.
Yes, and the whole sector tends to use the wrong measures, because what they tend to do is say, we've reached 2 million people, or 3 million people, because it's a big number. No, we've reached them. It doesn't matter how many people you've reached. What matters is what you've done for them, and the impact you've had. And it's much better to be able to say, well, we changed the lives or double the incomes of 100,000 people, than to say we reached 1 million people.
Yes.
So what?
Yes, a permanent transformation.
Yeah, and you'll see nearly all the NGOs, when they report, they go for the number of people reached.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's a big number and they can measure it.
Yes.
Rather than the number of people impacted. So that's a fundamental misuse of measurement.
Yeah. Could you perhaps give me an example of either a success story that you might want to share because of the reasons for its success, or of a story in which you've learnt from failure within your own or someone else's philanthropy?
Yeah, we've had failures over the last 12 years or so. We've had about 8 programs, of which 2 failed. And 6 were pilot tests which succeeded. But we're very, very keen on scaling up our pilot tests, and we've been disappointed that we only got about half of them scaled up. I think the project that really surprised me most was quite a small project which was heavily scaled up, and that was an educational project in a very poor state of India, Odisha, just on the Bay of Bengal. And it was in an ethnic area, very, very poor people. They lived in the forests, they had their own gods, they had their own language. And the problem which Oxfam brought to us was there are 12 schools there. The government teachers live outside the tribal area. They haven't got transport in some cases. They don't speak the language very well, many of them, and half the schools are closed, and the attendance rate of the teachers, the government paid teachers, is 48%. Now in India generally, on any given day, the attendance rate of government teachers is about 75%. So the problem was, what do we do about this? Yeah. And Oxfam and the teachers, when they actually were teaching, they had pretty old-fashioned methods. So Oxfam and an excellent NGO, which was full of the ethnic people and led by an ethnic person, came up with the idea, well, let's take some of our brightest young people, young people in late teens, early 20s, and let's train them in modern teaching methods. Now, they haven't got degrees. They might have good O-level equivalents or a couple of A-levels. And let's put them, one per school, and let's put them out there side by side with the government teachers. That might encourage the government teachers to come along. So, and then we had to look at each of the 28 government teachers, and we did a personal development plan for each one. What's the problem? Hasn't got a motorbike, lives 20 miles away, we'll get him a motorbike. Doesn't speak the language, we'll teach him the local language, and so on. So that worked very, very well. School attendance more than doubled, went up by about 2.5%. All the schools were opened, and the academic results were much improved. So that was that, and we were happy with that. It was only 12 schools, yeah. But the head of our local NGO was an ethnic chap, wrote poetry, and very influential in the state, in the ethnic area. And partly through him, partly through the Oxfam contacts, we got that 12-school program scaled up to over 2,000 schools, all the schools in the ethnic areas, and the government funded 3,300 new ethnic teachers.
Wow.
So we were quite pleased with that, really, and that was one of our better results. We had two failures. One is so painful I don't even want to talk about it, because it involved working with the measurement department of a very well-known NGO. Mm-hmm. And having spent a lot of time at Procter & Gamble, who are probably world-class in market research and measurement, I knew a little bit about it. Yes. But they weren't in the least interested in hearing what I or Sandra had to say. Yeah. And we ended up almost not on speaking terms with them. We canned the project after a couple of years. But when I later met the lady running this department, she said it was successful from our point of view because it enabled us to get the NGO to increase our spending on measurement from 2% to 4% or something. Mm. But the other one that failed was one in Ghana, right at the top of Ghana, in the middle of nowhere, in Bolgatanga. And it was a girls' scholarship program. Uh-huh. And it was a very successful program, and it was run by a local NGO, and the INGO, the international NGO, was right down in Accra, mm-hmm. 5 hours travel away, because it was, a heck of a journey really, and didn't seem to visit the project very often. And it was quite evident to us from our first visit that there was a real weakness in the structure of the NGO, run by two sisters, one of whom became quite well known and was giving talks in America and so on, and the other one who had a nervous breakdown. And there was no management supporting it, so we picked this up in the first year, because our 3 attempts at a budget meeting failed because the numbers weren't there. Mm. And we felt that the NGO in Accra wasn't really spending enough time supervising, and they already knew that there was a weakness in the structure. So we went back there the second year, and slight improvement, and so we withdrew from the program even, and we found it pretty sad because it was an excellent program, and we felt really bad about these girls and their families, but it just wasn't working. And then when we went back to London, we had a lovely dialogue with the head office, and they admitted that what I've said. But that was that really, and we haven't done any projects with that particular INGO since. And most of our work actually has been with Oxfam, who we think are an excellent INGO, and there are others as well who are very, very good, like Action Aid, Plan International. We work with a number of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to consider failures in inverted commas, because obviously that's how as humans we learn, isn't it? And one hopes that there was learning on the part of the other people involved within the project, essentially.
Yeah, there was not as much as learning as we would have liked, actually. I mean, I think the key learning in the one in Ghana was that the INGO must keep tabs on the program, and generally speaking, 70 to 80% of these programs are delegated, the implementation, to local NGOs. And the INGO, the International NGO, will have a supervisory role and will do field work there, maybe once every month or something, because the local NGOs tend to be in the capital cities, and all these programs are in pretty inhospitable places, a long way away. 5 hours in a Toyota that's done 200,000 miles and has 3 punctures on the way, and then the accommodation is not even 1 star. Obviously, you don't go there for the accommodation. So sometimes the INGOs are not hands-on enough. Although I have to say that nearly all the people we worked with out there in India and Vietnam and Bangladesh, they've been good caliber, very good caliber, and paid a lot less than the people at head office.
Yeah. So you've commissioned this report. The report is now available. You know what some of the key steps that could be implemented are in order to increase the that impact of charitable giving.
Yeah.
What are the next steps now for you?
Right. We've identified areas of consensus and agreement on things like equal voices. So the people on the front line should have an equal voice with the very wealthy funders. Much better collaboration, for example, and massive improvement needed in knowledge sharing and knowledge management. And the important thing is this was a global survey done by an excellent market research company, Jigsaw Research, and there were sort of 70 or 80% majorities in favour of the proposed action by both funders and people on the front line, and people from the global south and people from the global north. So we have identified opportunities for change, but we've now got to turn them into practical action. And the sector's much better at talking than action, whereas the army is much better at doing things than talking about it. And I prefer the latter, actually, doers rather than talkers. So we're having a global conference at the Aga Khan Centre in London in February, and we are working with an awful lot of funders through our excellent consultant, Barry Knight, who is one of the co-founders of the Shift the Power movement. And we're having a number of group discussions with them, and we are co-developing solutions, because in this particular sector, people like to work bottom up, and that's the effective way to do it. Top down doesn't really work in this sector, so we are co-creating the solutions with a wide variety of people, and the sector's siloed, so we are trying to get people from human rights, poverty reduction, peace building and areas, and get them to agree on the basic principles across activity areas. So we hope that by the time we get to the global conference in February, that we will have practical plans to present to all those attending and all those not attending, but it'll be face-to-face but also online, and turn this into action. And we're quite small. I mean, we're tiny compared to Gates or Oxfam even. So, we're innovators and we're entrepreneurs, but we're looking for other people to scale it up globally in a much bigger way. And we are talking to at least a couple of people who seem to be interested in helping scale up beyond the conference. So after the conference, we'll take a back seat there to help if needed, but other people much bigger than us, we hope, will drive it forward.
And if I could end by asking, do you have any final words of wisdom from your experience in this sector? If you to those who are perhaps just starting out in their philanthropic journey, if you could share some of your key learnings along the way, and perhaps what you would say to your younger self if you were to start out again?
Yes, well, we made a lot of mistakes, and we've learned along the way, and we're still learning. I think the most important thing for me is to identify what your activity area is going to be. Is it going to be women and girls? Is it going to be human rights? And where you're going to do it, and then to develop a vision for the kind of change that you want, and then decide how you're going to do it. Are you going to do it yourself? Will you do it through local community foundations? Will you do it through an INGO, and so on? And then when you've got to that point, the sector does have a real knack for complicating everything. Mm-hmm. And I remember one meeting we had with an INGO, and when I was in business, what we tried to do was to unpeel the onion. Mm-hmm. And so we would go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until we had turned great complexity into some very simple principles, which everybody understood and everybody could implement. The sector doesn't understand that, and it glories in complexity. And I remember one time having a conversation with quite a senior person in an INGO, and questioning the complexity. He said, well, if you think it's simple, you just don't understand the issues. And so keep it simple. And when you're doing a program, have very clear objectives, not too many, maybe 2 at most, and let's have a couple of numbers in those 2 as well. And then deliverables, what are they going to be? Mm-hmm. And measurement. Measurement is absolutely critical, and you've got to measure the right things. And then be humble, because it's a difficult area. People don't like admitting mistakes, but it's important that you do learn all the time, and we're quite open about our failures. We've had some failures. Mm. We've done some silly things, but that's life, and be humble, and I think the most important thing is to understand the wisdom, the real wisdom and learning lies not in seminars or conferences or with big NGOs. It lies on the front line with the people who live there, and you can't really understand a country unless you live there. And even if you live there, you might be better off, and you won't understand the people in the bottom 20-30%. Yes. So they are the people you must listen. And if you listen, they will provide the answers. They'll tell you what their biggest problems are, and they'll help you with the solutions. And a good thing to do is to share your skills and their skills. So you may have skills in IT or marketing, but their skill is they understand how to make things happen, and they understand what the most important issues are. Mm.
Hugh, you make it sound very simple indeed, actually. You make it sound like what we need to learn how to do is to become better listeners, and to have the humility to listen to those whose voices matter the most in this equation. So may I thank you very, very much for taking the time to come and speak with us about this subject that I know will be very close to our listeners' hearts. Thank you very much, Hugh.
I think you've got an excellent project, and I'm sure it'll be successful.
Thank you.